I want you to open up your Bibles for a moment to Romans chapter 16 and verse 17. That's where we'll get started. Lord, we just thank you for today. We thank you for all the things that you have done for us, Lord. And we just bless this time that we have together as your children, Lord, to come and read your word. And, Lord, accept the challenges that you have before us, Lord, to go and preach your gospel, Lord, all over the world. In your name we pray. Amen. You know, as we all know, today is 9/11. And as we remember 9/11, I remember exactly where I was at 9/11. I was working in Connecticut County at the school board. And I was in one of the cafeterias, and I was sitting down there talking with the cafeteria ladies. And somebody came in, they said, a plane has hit a building in downtown New York. And that's all we knew at the moment. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. You know, I didn't think they let planes get that close to that stuff. And then I thought, oh, it's just one of these little planes, like a little jet engine. Next thing you know, everybody who had a cell phone back then, all the cell phones started going off constantly. And the story was, it was a big jet. So I called Mary Beth, my wife, and am I not loud enough? That's the first time in my life I've ever been told I wasn't loud enough. So that's good. That's good right there. So there it was. You know that there was planes hitting the towers, and I said, "Oh my goodness, what in the world is going on?" And in that instant, just like she said, we were all Americans at that one moment. It really didn't matter class. It didn't matter because there were people that died in that building that I'm sure had millions and millions of dollars, and money can't save you. There were people in that building that were just servants of this community, and their servanthood went to the grave with them. Thank God for that. But one way or another, we were all the same people. And you know what? The truth of it is, we are still all God's people. We're all God's children. You know, that's the greatest thing about the Bible. If you believe the Bible like it's written, every last one, we're all kin folks. You know, I say I'm John and Gladys's daughter, and I mean, no, that'd be something else. John and Gladys's son, and I have a sister though. And but my Aunt Mary and Uncle Ralph just love them to death, and that's my family. But the truth of it is, we're all in God's family. And so in Romans 16 through 18, it says, greet each other with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ send greetings. I urge you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching that you have learned. Keep away from them, for such people are not serving our Lord Jesus Christ, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of the naive people. You know, anytime somebody comes to divide us as people, you know, that's not a good thing. And the Bible tells us right there very clearly, you better watch out for those folks because they're not doing anything good for you. You know, the Gideons International is just a group of businessmen and our wives serve in the auxiliary. And our sole purpose is to get the Word of God out to the public, out to the people all over the world. And 9/11, 2001, believe it or not, that was the day that, as a Gideon, we've been looking forward to all summer. And they said, hey, you know, not the exact date, but this is sometime in the late summer and the early fall, we should get the funds from, you know, churches, contributions, and et cetera. We should get the funds to have the first 1 billion Bibles purchased and passed out. That should come in the late fall. Well, there just so happened to be, everybody gets to work, and they ended the work day of the day before, and they said, well, you know, based on what we get in every single day, tomorrow morning is the day. So since September 11th was going to be the day that they already knew, they called around and they wanted to make sure nobody took a sick day on that day. Everybody was going to be there to celebrate. Well, at 8 o'clock, they started celebrating. They had their celebration, and they had a lot of different things lined up. They were not going to go that particular day, but they were going to go very soon and present that 1 billionth Bible to George W. Bush. It was a gold edition. Doesn't mean it's made of gold. It's just a gold-colored Bible. But they were going to give that to George W. Bush. And everything was planned out until, you know, as we know, a little after 8 o'clock is when all this started. And so they said, well, what do we do? Of course, as Christians, we always pray. But they said, we're going to double our efforts. It might have taken us nearly 100 years to get that first billion, but it's not going to take 100 years to get the next. So they started working that day, and I remember being in the Gideons and thinking like, wow, we're giving out 1 billion Bibles. There's only 7 billion people on the face of the earth. That's pretty good. That's pretty good contribution right there. But they said, we got to keep going. We got to keep going. And now, just 14 years later, last June, they hit 2 billion Bibles. And that's not me, I promise you. I don't have it to give, I promise you. I don't have it to give. But that $1 billion, that second $1 billion, it came from churches just like you. And it did a lot of great work. And in Romans, in Isaiah 55:11, we all know that scripture. If you'll turn over there. Isaiah 55:11 says, "And so is my word that goes forth from my mouth. It will not return to me empty or void, but it will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for what I sent it." You know, every day we have choices. We have choices in what we do. To get up, go to work, and live our life. But thank goodness that we can work together to do things for God. Some Gideons that were from South Carolina. Now, Gideon camps, as you'll hear me say, they're all over the world. You know, a person like me, I live in Atmore, Alabama. My camp is the Gideon camp out of Atmore, and so that's the camp that I go to. But those camps, as that one is, are set up all over the world. So lots of times when I say Gideons in this country, they are from that country. They're not strangers. They live right down the road from where they're going. Now, guess what? In these very, very impoverished countries, lots of times that money does come from the United States because we're blessed so much in the United States with money. But many countries, many of the industrialized countries are self-funded, like England and such. And so they fund their own. But in places like India, there are local camps that are working, and they're doing the things just like that I'm doing. And so the Gideons from South Carolina, they had gone to India, and they were going to do a distribution with the local Gideons there. So Matthew, he was one of the local Gideons there from India, and he was their translator, and he was going to work through the day. And he was able to borrow a car because he could not afford a car, but he borrowed one for that day. And they were able to go around to the different schools. So as they were going around the different schools, they asked Matthew, they said, "Well, Matthew, how did you get saved?" And he said, "Well, actually, I got saved from what we're doing today." And they said, "Well, that's great. So how did that happen, Matthew?" And he said, "Well," he said, "when I was a kid, my family were all devout Hindus. And so we didn't have any copy of God's Word in our house, and that would have never been allowed in our house. So I was at school one day, and these men came in, and they said they were Gideons. And I didn't know what that meant, but they said they had a free gift for us. And he said, as a poor little Indian boy, anything that's free, you're going to take it. So he said, I took that Bible. And the man got it in front of our classroom, and he told us about this concept called sin. And he said, I really didn't understand sin, but he said, I knew in my heart that we've all done things wrong. And he said, so as I was listening to the man, I raised my hand when he asked, he said, does any of you want to be saved today? And he said, well, if I can get rid of this sin, I want to do it. So little Matthew was led to the Lord right there in the schoolyard. Well, after that, he went home, and his dad said, what is it you're reading over there? And he said, it's this little book the Gideons gave me at school. And he says, well, is that a Bible? And he said, yeah, that's what it is. It's a Bible. And he said, well, you're not going to have that in my house. And his wife went over, and she took the Bible away from him, and she scolded him some. And she said, how dare you bring something like this in my house? Well, the little boy, he'd been a Christian all of 15 minutes, and there he is getting knocked over the head. So he really doesn't even know what he's done. But there it is. The little bit of knowledge he had was from reading that day, and it was gone. And so his mom has this Bible. Well, she gets to thinking, she says, I've always wondered what was in that Bible. I've never been able to read one, never had one for myself. I think I'll read some of it and just see what it's about. Well, she started reading that New Testament, and day after day she'd make a little more time to read it, and then she noticed that when she looked in the very back page to see where he had signed his name, she saw the Roman road, and it talked about those same things that he had talked about. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And you know, she as an adult, she knew what all that meant. And she gave her heart to the Lord. And she went back to her son Matthew, and she apologized for taking it from him. And she said, I am so sorry that I took something so wonderful from you. She says, you know, I want you to come in my room after your daddy leaves every day, and we're going to start reading this Bible together. And he said, okay, Mom, that'd be great. But the other thing was, he had a little brother. How many of y'all here? A little brother was forced to read the Bible. He didn't have a choice. But he got saved too. Because, you know, there's some people who need Jesus, you know, more than others. And his brother was one of those people. So his brother got saved. Well, then all of a sudden the father comes home and he just notices that something's different. And all of a sudden one day he started kind of nosing around, and sure enough, he found where Mom had been keeping the Bible. And she didn't just have it there pressed up, not used. Oh no, she had been reading it and dog-earing it and marking things in the Bible. And he says, I can't believe it. In my own Hindu home, I've got 3 people who have forsaken me. So he forbid it. Now, if you want to make your child rebel, forbid something. They'll start doing that tomorrow. You know, no more working out and eating healthy. No more. And they'll start doing it. So he told him, he said, no more of this reading the Bible. So he took it. And afraid that no matter where he would hide it, they would find it. He put it in his shirt pocket and he went to work. And just like the mother, he started going, what in the world is in this Bible that makes him want to read it so much? And so he started reading it. And then he was saved and the whole family was saved. And see, that's what it is. God's word will never return void. You know, this guy named Joe, I can't really say his real name, but he's from Yugoslavia, so you just kind of figure it out. Joe's the best we're going to be able to get out of him. But Joe was on a train one day, and he went to go see a friend of his who was in prison. So as he got into prison, they started visiting. They told everybody to just stay where you are, so we have a man that's coming in, and he's going to give the prisoner something. So Joe's just sitting there, and the guy starts passing out these little books, and he realizes it's a New Testament. So Joe, not ever having a Bible, you know, he said, well, what is this? And he said, oh, it's the New Testament, it's the Bible, whatever. And so they began to minister and preach to the inmates there. Well, man, I always love Philip in the Bible because, you know, Philip was the easiest convert that Jesus ever had. Jesus walks up and he says, Philip, how you doing? And Philip goes, you are the Christ. You know, you have some people like that. They catch on quick. They don't need a lot of beating on the head. Boom. And that's what Joe was. Joe said, hey, you know, this is right. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. So Joe, in that prison, he gets saved and he takes his Bible. And he's so excited. And so all the way home on the train, he's just reading and reading. And he's just having the best time. And he's thinking like, wow, I have been missing out on this my whole life and finally finding out about this person, Jesus, and all the things that he's done for us. And all of a sudden, right as they were approaching this train station, the security guy, who was a communist guy, he was in there and he was checking everybody's papers. And this is 2 or 3 miles outside of the station. So as he's checking everybody's papers, he gets to Joe and he sees that Bible. As soon as he sees that Bible, he jerked it out of his hand. He says, you don't need this garbage. And he throws it out the window. And Joe goes, oh no, there's my Bible. It's gone. And he looked back, and sure enough, there goes the railroad tracks. It's gone. So he says, well, I guess that's that. Said, I have to save me up some money and work and buy him a Bible. And that's just what Joe did. Joe got back home and he went to his job and kept working. And as soon as he got paid, he went down to the little bookstore and he bought him a Bible. Well, Joe got saved. You know, Joe started going to church just like you did this morning and started participating. And you know, the years just drug on. So as life goes on, one day the pastor gets up and he says, you know, we're going to have a testimony service tonight. And said, you know, a lot of us are old friends, but, you know, it's always wonderful to hear how someone got saved. And so Joe says, well, I'll be glad to tell you how I got saved. So he tells the story just like I'm telling you. And the pastor's over there and he says, Joe said, when Joe got through, he privately called him over to the side and he said, I need to talk to you for just a second. And the service was going on and somebody else was testifying. He said, Joe, where were you when that happened? And he told him where he was. And he said, what day was it? And he told him what day. And the pastor said, well, I want to give you my testimony. And the pastor told that church, he said, well, I was a mean old railroad worker. standing on the side of the railroad. I was just cussing my men out, telling them how sorry they were. And about that time, something flew out the train and knocked my hat off. And he said, it made me so mad. He said, I just picked it up, I shoved it in my pocket, and I just kept on cussing at him. And he said, I got back home that night, and I was taking out my keys and my wallet and everything. And I said, what in the world? And he said, I pulled out, and it was that little Bible. And he said, at first, I started to throw it away. But he said, I laid it on my dresser. He said, then I started carrying it to work with me every day. And so next thing you know, I was reading it. And God saved me and called me in the ministry. And you know, those things like that, they sound so strange, but man, it's just amazing how many times they happen. Boy, I tell you, when your eyes go, it's gone. That's when you know you start getting over right there. Oh, this is in Tanzania. In Tanzania, there were some Gideons, local Gideons, and they were going down to the jail to minister to the prisoners. Now, you know, our local Gideons, we go every other year to Holman. And as you possibly know, if you know, some of you I'm sure work at Holman or know somebody who works at Holman. Anyway, with all the violence that they've had, they've told us, you're not going to be able to come in for a while. So, you know, really pray for the We Care ministries and the chaplains there, because they're doing the work until someone else can come in. But it was a jail just like this, and they had passed out the Gideon New Testaments to these group of prisoners. And there was this guy, he gets up there, and he's talking on behalf of the Gideons. And he's talking about confessing their sins. He's talking about that you need to get your life straight and whatever. And he was somebody like me, just kind of kept going on and on and on. Pretty soon this guy stops and said, hey, sir. And he says, what? He says, if you'll stop, we'll all get saved. I thought, well, that's one way to get the church over with real quick, to say, hey, we give up. And so, you know, that's how God's work works. You know, sometimes we don't have to be beat over the head. You know, as you know, my little glasses, I put fishing line on it because I was too cheap to buy one of those $18 pieces of cord. But if you use fishing line on your glasses, don't use more than 4-pound test, because 20-pound test will get you like that one of these days. You need something that'll break. But God told us to be fishers of men. Now, why didn't God tell us to do something else? First of all, fishing is a hobby. Now, there are people who fish for a living. Now, fishing for a living is a little bit different than fishing for a hobby. But even if you're fishing for a living, now God didn't make us blacksmiths of men, or we could heat them up real good and then bang them and make them into the shape we want them. He didn't make us that. He didn't make us accountants of men. They keep every little thing in a journal, make sure it bounces to the penny. Oh, you didn't give all your tithe that week, so better watch out. In danger of hell's fire on that one right there. No, he made us fishers of men. He wanted us to know that if we would get out and do his work, this is actually something fun and enjoyable to do. I promise you, of all the things I do in my life, this is one, it's nerve-wracking at times, but this is the most enjoyable thing that I do in all of my life. And where that water disappeared on my house. I was telling ladies this morning, one time I got so thirsty, they had a thing, they had donated all this water to like people that their houses had burned or something. And I got so thirsty, I just had to take one. And everybody started looking at me like, I can't believe he took one off the donation pile. I said, look, Jesus picked corn one time on Sunday. He said it was a good reason for it. And I gave it back in donation. So sometimes you have to go with what the Spirit says. But anyway, Jimmy Conway, I feel like everybody in the world knows Jimmy Conway. But Jimmy Conway, he runs Conway Diesel Service up in Evergreen on the interstate. And so anytime you're going up to Montgomery, you get to about the Owassa exit, you look over to the left, and there's this big cleared out place and a barn, and that's Conway Diesel Service. Well, Jimmy is just he's just a wonderful guy, big old dude, and he just loves the Lord. So he's been a Gideon for a long time. And a guy came in one day and his truck was torn up, so they had hauled him in and they figured out what was wrong, and Jimmy, told him what it was going to cost, and they start working on his truck. Well, they started working on his truck. Some people, they like to stay in the little lobby area. Well, Jimmy's lobby area is a little bitty, one of these little work sheds like you have out behind your house, the little metal work sheds. And so there's not much to look at, and there's no TV or anything. So most everybody ends up sitting out there with Jimmy watching him work on the truck. So as Jimmy and the guy are sitting out there, they just start talking. And the guy's like, yeah, you know, it's a beautiful day. And Jimmy's like, yeah, the Lord gave us a beautiful day. Well, they got talking about the Lord. And you know how a lot of folks are? Every story you tell, they got a little better story to tell. Oh, my grandma did this, and my grandpa did that, and whatever. So they just had the best time just talking and everything. And so Jimmy got the bill wrote up, and the guy wrote him out a check. And so he said, okay, we'll see you later. Well, just as Jimmy's going back to put the check in the safe, God says, ask him if he's saved. And Jimmy thought, now, God, if I've done been talking to this man for 3 hours about how much he loves the Lord and how all his family saves us. We're not talking about it. Ask him if he's saved. And Jimmy says, oh, Lord, said, I'm going to embarrass this man to death. He said, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because if I don't do it, I'm going to feel bad about it. So he walks out there and he said, hey, partner. He calls everybody partner. He said, hey, partner. He said, let me ask you a quick question. He said, what's that? He said, are you saved? And the guy kind of paused. He said, yeah, Jimmy, I'm saved. I'm Christian. Praise God. He said, okay, good. He said, the Lord just wanted me to ask you. He said, well, you have a great day. So he got in the truck and he took off. Jimmy had a normal good day and goes home, eats supper, and goes to bed. Well, about 11 o'clock at night, Jimmy's phone rings. Now, you imagine being in the tow truck business. That happens a lot. So his wife rolls over. She can do it without even being awake. She just picks up. Having a rough day. Just picked up the phone and handed it to Jimmy. Jimmy said, somebody's on the phone for you. So he picks up the phone and there's a man crying on the other side of the phone. And he's like, wow, he's got some real trouble with his truck must be on fire, And he said, hey man, what's wrong? He said, Brother Jimmy, said, I lied to you today. He said, who is this? Because see, when you work for yourself, a lot of people lie to you every day, so you have to make sure we're sure which liar you're dealing with. And he said, I lied to you today. He said, what are you talking about? He said, you asked me before I got in that truck if I was a Christian, and I lied to you, and I told you I was, only because I was just too ashamed to admit that I know how to talk the talk, and I was raised in church, and all that I said about my family is true, but I'm just as lost as I ever was. He said, tell you the truth, right, my whole plan was I was going to drive this truck down here to Biloxi and go to the Beau Rivage, and I was going to have a big time and a big party. Now, you took $3,000 of my spending money away from me and put it into ministry, but I had some left over, and I was going to take the rest of that money, and I was going to gamble the rest of the night. He said, and I felt so guilty. I even pushed through, though, and I took my bath, and I went down there, and I got me something to eat, and said every time I would think, okay, I'm fixing to go, he said, all I could see is your face and saying, are you a Christian? And he said, I just wanted to call you and tell you that I lied to you. And Jimmy says, well, look. I said, I get lied to all the time. That's no big deal. He said, you can lie to me, that's fine. But he said, when you lie to God, that's a whole different thing. And he said, now, if everything we talked about today is true, and if that was really out of your heart, said, you're ready, you want to get saved. That's what it is. He said, Jimmy said, I need God. And he told him how messed up his life was and everything. He said, well, I can tell you, brother, so you can go down there to that casino and give them $500 and your life won't change a bit. But he said, if you look right there in that drawer, there should be a Bible in there. And sure enough, the Gideons in that area were faithful, and the churches were faithful to give the money to buy the Bibles. He pulled it out and there was a Gideon Bible. And so Jimmy talked to him. He led him through the prayer of salvation, and they got saved right there. And that happens every day. I mean, when we had Hurricane Katrina, and right after Hurricane Katrina was over, like within a couple of days after all that was done, the hotel that's right there at Atmore on the interstate, they called us and they said, look, our ladies have said all the Bibles are gone. And that's what happens when tragedy happens. People reach out for God. So instead of going once every 6 months, we started going like once every couple of weeks. And you know what? Every time we go, there'll be 15 or 20 Bibles missing. Because when you lose everything, when I mean everything, and you don't have a toothbrush, you don't have a Bible, you start reaching out for whatever you can find. This next story is about this guy. And this morning, because I'm one of these kind of people, Uncle Ralph can vouch for me. I've always talked a lot. And my mama loved to tell stories. My mama was a great storyteller. And that gift passed on to me. And so lots of times when I tell stories, you know, as people have said, if you don't watch, you start adding to it. So I make sure every now and then I go back and read the original. Because if I don't read the original, boy, I'll say, now, wouldn't it have been funny if they had said this? And next thing you know, it's in the story. Now, if I'm telling you a joke, that's one thing. But when I'm doing this stuff, I take it very seriously, believe it or not. And so this morning I wanted to research this story, and I found a hidden piece that I had missed the first time. So I said, Lord, I know that, because it was just on my heart so much to keep looking for it. So I know this was something God wanted y'all to hear. This guy, his name was George. And when George was about 9 years old, as they say, he didn't have ADD, he was just BAD. He was just a bad little kid. He was so bad that when the Angolan army came through, you know, most everybody, when the army came through, they got lost. They either ran for the hills or hid out or whatever. But his mama stood out in the road and she said, y'all need some help? This little boy right here, he's always wanted to be in the army ever since he's born. And they said, ma'am, he's a little bit young to be riding with us. And said, oh yeah, but he catches on quick. And George's like, Mama, I don't want to go with those men. She said, oh yeah, you do. Said, it'll be fun. Boy, you love getting into stuff. You know, the army's just the place for you. And he said, you just couldn't believe it. He said, man, he thought, man, Mama, you just gave me away. And I don't mean he didn't go for the week. He went for good. And so he jumped on back that big army carrier. Man, he was over the hill he went. So a few days of shining boots and learning how to clean guns and that kind of stuff. And you know, kids love guns. I mean, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the noise or whatever, something shiny. But man, George he hung out with those guys all the time. So pretty soon one day they were out there behind the barracks or whatever, and he heard them shooting. So he ran out there to them. He said, hey, can I get y'all anything? They said, no, we're good, George. And so they're shooting and shooting. He says, I sure would like to shoot one of those guns. And you know how it is with a kid, you know, everybody wants to get the first, like, boy, he's going to shoot it one time, he's going to throw it down, and he'll never ask again. So they handed him the gun, they said, see if you can shoot that jug down there. So George put the sights on it, pulled the trigger, and it exploded. Now, as all you have ever missed a deer, it never hurts when you hit it. It only hurts when you miss it. And so George didn't feel anything because he saw that jug explode. And so every day when the sniper team would go down there, he'd go down there with them. Or pretty soon, hey, George was the best shot of all of them. And they would joke and kid and say, yeah, one of these days when we get a little mission, you'll need to go on it with us. And he says, oh, I'd love to go. And so one night they had been messing around and been drinking a little bit too much, and their officer came up and said, hey, that guy we've been wanting to get, he's available tonight. He's going to be over here in this area, and he's having a meeting, and here's his poster, and we want y'all to kill him. And so then they were like, man, if I'd known I was going to have to work tonight, I wouldn't have been drinking all day. And they said, okay, we'll go get it done. So they take George with them. They said, listen, George, we're going to give you a special privilege tonight. You're going to get to do your first assassination. He goes, man, that's great. So what do I have to do? He says, well, we're going to show you who it is, and we're going to point them out to you. And all you got to do is do like you do with those milk jugs. Just pull the trigger, and we'll tell you if you have to shoot again. He says, okay. So they get there, and they get up on the bank, and there's this guy. He had a white shirt like this. And so he was standing out there by this big car, and they said, that's him, George, in the white shirt. That's what we want you to shoot. So George laid down there, put the sights on him. As you know, kids don't have a conscience. And he pulled the trigger, boom, guy just explodes on the back wall, and he drops, he's dead. And they say, okay, George, let's go. So they put him in the truck. Well, man, George all the way home was like, we don't want to do any more? You know, I'm like, no, that's it. That's it for the night. And George got excited. So every day he would just bug him, but when we're going to go do something like that again? Because he had fun, you know. And they were like, man, you don't realize what you did, do you? And he says, well, what did I do? I helped the army. And they said, yeah, you helped the army all right. They're like, man, this kid has a cold-blooded killer. And not only did George become a good sniper, but George could do the close-up killing that the other guys didn't like to do. He could run in a crowd of people and just throw back the hammer and just lay them all down. It didn't bother him because he was a kid. Well, when he was about 12 years old, the Russians started coming into Angola, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to help George's group out to overthrow the country, and that's what they did. And so after the country was overthrown, the Russians said, well, you know, we need some people that's from this area that will help us out and do what we want them to do. So they took little old George and they said, you're going to go to Moscow and we're going to teach you to read and do all this other kind of stuff. Because, you know, George had never been a day at school in his life. So he goes to Moscow, and after about 2 years, you know, he had a good handle on, you know, Russian is what he wanted him to speak. And so he had a good handle on Russian. He learned to speak and learned to read Angolan also. And after 2 or 3 years, they said, hey, George, you've got the basic education that we need. We're going to send you to Cuba for the rest of your training. So they sent him down to Cuba for 2 years. Well, 4 years later, little 16, 17-year-old George Van Gullipe, he returns to Angola. And you know how Russians are, they got a bunch of medals down there. So his friends were all teasing him about his uniform and everything. And they said, oh yeah, what'd you get that one for? Being good in the cafeteria and stuff like that. And he says, no, he said, I'm an expert this and expert that. And they said, oh, George, said, I bet you're not the George you used to be. He said, I'm the same old guy I used to be. And they said, yeah, but you were a cold-blooded killer when you were young. Said, I bet you've lost a lot of that. He said, I can still do it today. And they said, well, matter of fact, so we got a pastor. They want us to go and kidnap him. And then after we interrogate him, we're supposed to kill him. And George says, well, that's not the way we do it. And he said, well, who is we? He says, well, the way the Soviets do it is you want to make an example out of this preacher. And they said, well, how are we going to do that? He says, well, we're going to walk in that church, and we're going to kill him in the church. I said, man, George said, okay, we'll see what you'll do. So they showed up they went on a Sunday morning. They knew if they came Sunday night, they wouldn't have the same effect, half the crowd, So they came that Sunday morning, and they got there, and the pastor walked up and he says, sir, what can I do for you? And he says, I'm here with your arrest warrant. And like any good preacher, he said, well, look, I've been preparing all week. Let me preach one last time to my congregation. And he says, sure, go right ahead, because George knew he was going to kill him. I mean, that was going to happen. And the preacher even took his word for it. He said, I know you're going to do what you say, but just let me have one more time with my congregation. So he did. And the preacher turned to, and you can turn to, Romans chapter 10 and verse 20. And the preacher read out to him, he said, I was found by those that did not seek me. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. And George listened to his whole sermon, and all he could think about was, I got my gun, I got my bullets, I'm going to walk down there. And he was just planned out in his mind. And even though he heard the sermon and he heard what he talked about, he wasn't really paying attention, but he did hear it. So when the sermon was over, George went down and his men took all the exits and they closed them all where no one could get out. He walks down, he grabs the preacher, puts the gun in his head and kills him right there, blows his brains out, right there in front of everybody. Everybody goes nuts, of course. So George gets in the Jeep and they're riding down the road and they're like, man, George, that was the most cold-blooded thing I've ever seen in my life. Says, you don't have to worry about that church anymore. I bet you they'll shut up doors tomorrow. So a few years later, George is still having nightmares. And in their culture, they believe that that dreams mean a lot. We ignore dreams. I have crazy dreams all the time. And but in their culture, they really, really pay attention to dreams. And George kept seeing this pastor in all of his dreams. Well, then George started getting sick. Now, he was about 22, 23 at this time. It had been a few years. But he started getting sick. And then, when you're a big, powerful man and you start getting sick, people don't just, feel sorry for you. They start thinking you're weak. And they started thinking, George has lost it. Look how skinny he is, he's lost it. He always looks dogged out. Man, look how tired his eyes are sore. So George got to where he said, I got to figure out what's wrong with me. So he went to his mama's house one day, and mama's cure for everything is all you need to do is get something to eat and get you a nap. That'll fix everything. If USA ever figured that out, well, they'd have to shut down. But, that George said, Mama, I need more than a nap and something to eat. And she said, well, let's just try that. So he ate a little something, he went and took a nap, and when he woke up, he had one of those dreams. He said, man, why didn't I think about this a long time ago? He said, that church put some kind of spell on me. He said, I'm going to have to go down there and tell them that if they would be so nice and so kind to take the spell off me, and it won't be any hard feelings. Let's see if that works. So he goes down to the church, and he had lost so much respect from the community that they stood up to George, and they said, you're not coming in this church. My wife's a piano player at our church, and they'll tell you it's easy to get another preacher. It's hard to get another piano player. So they were like, "Hey, it's pretty hard to get a preacher around here after you shot that last one. You can't come in." So me and George was like, "Okay," and he just turned tail and went back home. He didn't have his uniform, didn't have his guns or anything. But after about a week or so, he decided, "I'm going back." So he goes back and he got it with the preacher, and he did just like he did the first time. He waited till the sermon started, everybody wasn't looking, and he just ran in. And he told the preacher, he said, "Hey, I need you to take this spell off me." And everybody just kind of snickered and laughed and whatever. And here's this powerful man who used to be so feared by everybody. Now he's just publicly just laughed at. And the preacher said, "George," said, "we didn't put a spell on you." Well, the preacher's scared too, because he's thinking, "Hey, this guy's killed one guy, he might kill me." And he said, "We didn't put a spell on you." He said, "Whatever's happening to you, George, that's God speaking to you." He said, "Well, I don't know how God speaks to you, but he's keeping me up all the night, and this has got to stop." And they said, "Well," said, you just got to listen to him." George says, "George, just go back there and have a seat, and when I get through preaching, then we'll talk some more." And guess what the preacher was preaching on? That same sermon they had heard 20 years before, saying that he was found by those who were not seeking him. George wasn't seeking God. George wasn't seeking any kind of thing. He didn't want to worship anything. He just loved that power. That's what we love about guns. We love the power. That's what it is. I don't have to chase this thing. I just shoot it. That's what he wanted. He wanted the power. That's what he was in love with. And all of a sudden he realized power wasn't going to get him anywhere. And so he went up after the sermon, and as he confessed his sins to the pastor, they prayed together, and he gave his life to the Lord. Now, if any of you have ever been saved over a day, you know this next part is absolutely 100% true. Because this is the part that we all know. The very next day, he woke up, hadn't had any dreams or nightmares or nothing, and he tells himself, "I'm not sure that was real. I'm not sure that really happened." And there it was after all this time and all these things that he saw. That's what I read this morning on the internet. He said the first thing that happened was the devil tried to steal it back from him. Isn't that the devil for you? Well, at least the good thing about the devil, he's predictable, And so George said, "Well, I got to go to this business trip, and I'm going to just go ahead and do that, and I'll go talk with the preacher another time." So he gets on his business trip, and he remembered somebody saying that the Gideons put Bibles in hotel rooms. And he said, "Wonder if there's a Bible in this hotel room." And he looked, and not only was it a Bible, but when he saw that Gideon symbol, he realized the preacher had given him the Bible that he had preached out of that day. Now, he didn't keep it, he threw it away. But he remembered seeing that Gideon symbol on the front of that Bible. And that was the Bible that the Gideons had given that pastor that he had been saved with. And that was the Bible that he gave George. And George not only got saved and started working in the church, but George became a big dog. George became General George Van Gullipy. And one thing about it, when countries start getting overthrown, who usually gets put in charge? The generals. So George was put in charge of a huge part of the government. And one part of the government that he was in charge of was community affairs and taking care of the people. And he said, we got to stop killing our people. We got to realize that sometimes they're going to have a different opinion than we do, and killing them is not the answer. And as of just a few months ago, George, who now is retired, he and the Gideons there, who still live in Angola, still working in Angola, they presented New Testaments and Bibles to all the upper administration and government there in Angola. And God can save George. God can save anybody. And the Gideons, like I said before, they passed out Bibles. They do that all over the world. 100% of everything you give does one thing, that's buy Bibles. That's all it does. It doesn't pay my gas to come up here. It doesn't buy me lunch. Aunt Mary's already offered to buy lunch today. And so see, that's taken off the table. And but really and truly, every bit of it goes just to buy Bibles. And you say, well, how much are those Bibles? Well, believe it or not, the hotel Bibles are still about $5 a piece. And that's the big entire Bible right there. Well, all kind of references in the front for what to do when you're anxious, what to do when you're scared, what to do when you have a decision to make. That's all there. And in the back of the Bible, it has the Roman road to salvation. And it has, in I forget how many different languages, John 3:16 in the front of the Bible, in many, many different languages. No matter what version of the Bible you get, that's all in all of them. And like I said, you know, the reason why that I do this and I get so much enjoyment out of it is when we read that magazine every month, you know, some stories are dramatic like George's. And some of them are not as dramatic. It just says they went to a little school and they were passing out Bibles. And they passed them out to 200 or 300 children. And they all took them. And they'll have little blanket statements like, and then the Gideon prayed with the whole class. And all the children gave their heart to God. You don't know, those 30, 40, 50 kids, you don't know what the rest of their life is. You don't know how getting 30 kids saved in the community, hey, that might be the brand new church right there. They go home, and you never know what all has been changed. But Isaiah 55:11, we know that's true, where it says, it will never return void. Whether it hits a guy in the back of the head and knocks his hat off, or whether it goes to somebody like George and it just is sitting in a desk drawer and he says, you know, I'm not sure if I got saved or not. And it's there. Because, you know, the truth of it is God wants us to go into all the world and preach the gospel. But you say, well, Steve, we can't all go. And I don't know Russian, and I don't know how to speak in Angola, and I don't know how to speak French. But you know what? That's how those Bibles are written. They're all written in all those different languages for those people to have so that they can read it in their own language. And there's a book, and it's called Dare to Witness. And in the book, Dare to Witness, the guy that wrote the book, he had a horrible life. You just had to read the book to find out all about it. But he had been a killer from the mob and all this other stuff. And when he got saved, no one ever told him that you wasn't supposed to witness. See, he'd never been in church, so he didn't know that people were scared to death to talk about their faith. So he just thought, this is the most interesting thing ever happened to me in my life. So he starts reading the Bible day and night, and he marked all the scriptures that the guy gave him to read, and he had marked them in his Bible. So he was just telling people left and right about what he had found, the faith that he had in God. And they were like, where'd you see that? I don't remember seeing that in the Bible. And he's always, it's on this page, it's on that page. So he had the most ingenious idea I think I've ever heard. Because he didn't know the Bible like you know it. You know, I remember doing sword drills and all this kind of stuff. He didn't know how to do all that. But he did recognize that his whole Bible was numbered, like page 1 through 1500 or whatever it was. So in the very front of his Bible, he put, turn to page 776. And that was a prophecy about Jesus. And then the next one line said, turn to page, that was it. Had one reference. Well, once he got to page 776, on the very top of his Bible it said, now go to page, 1312 and read this scripture. And then you turn the page over, and then people would start going, what are you looking at? He said, I'm looking at this number. It tells me where I have to go next. And they said, oh, well, I want to read it. And then he discovered something that we all know and we take for granted. Man, when I'm preaching to you, you might not remember anything I say. You might say it was good, it was bad, whatever. But I tell you what, when you read the Word of God for yourself, what does the Bible say? It burns, it divides the marrow from the bone. And in science terms, we think that's all the same thing. But it is so sharp, it goes into the heart and it changes people. And this guy realized, when I let people read the Bible, it's a lot better than when I'm wagging my finger and telling them what to do and what not to do. And so that's what I challenge y'all to do today. It's time for me to hand it back over to y'all, is to realize that that's how we're going to get people saved. Yes, we have to send people out. Yes, we have to have missionaries. Yes, we have to have local churches. All these people that got saved all over the world, hey, if they didn't have a local church to go to, they'd be like those seeds that's scattered on the ground that the birds came and quickly got it away. There's a lot of people that they know about God, but they never have a chance to fulfill it because they say, well, I can't go to church. They'll think I'm a hypocrite. Guess what? That's why the church has hypocrites. They should put a sign, 100% hypocrites. You know, because we deserve to go to hell, but we all are going to heaven, or most of us. And that's it, because the truth of it is we believe in God. We believe in God. And because of our faith, that's the only thing. It's by grace that we are saved. You know, none of us can work hard enough to do it. You know, God made the 10 Commandments just to show us, I'm going to give you just 10 rules. He could have gave us 5,000, but he gave us 10. We can't keep those 10. You know, and then Jesus said, okay, I'll sum them up, I'll make 2. And we can't keep those 2. You know, because you know what? We always want what's better for us. You know, it's hard to put God in charge of everything. But anyway, I thank y'all for listening to me today. And I'm not going to be like the guy at the jail and y'all had to say, please be quiet, we'll give something. I'm just going to go ahead and end it. I'm going to end it in a prayer.